The evening sky had faded to a deep purple as Judge Elaine Jackson pulled out of the courthouse parking garage. Another long day of cases had left her with a dull headache and a craving for the leftovers waiting in her fridge at home. 15 years on the bench had taught her to compartmentalize the stress, but some days weighed heavier than others. She loosened the collar of her blouse and switched the radio to a smooth jazz station. The soft saxophone notes filled her car, a modest 5-year-old sedan that served her well despite her ability to afford something flashier. Elaine had never been one for showing off. Her grandmother's words still echoed in her mind. It's not what you have, it's what you do with it. The streets were quieter now as she turned into the residential area that would take her home. Streetlights cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and the occasional dog walker nodded as she drove past. This part of her commute always helped her decompress, the familiar route allowing her mind to wander to the weekend ahead. Her sister was bringing the kids over for Sunday dinner, and Elaine was planning to try out a new recipe she'd been saving. Lost in thought, she almost missed the flash of lights in her rearview mirror. Red and blue reflections bounced off her windows, and Elaine's stomach tightened instinctively. She'd done nothing wrong. She was driving under the speed limit. Her registration was current and she hadn't made any illegal turns. Still, she knew the drill. 15 years as a judge had shown her the good and bad sides of law enforcement. Most officers were dedicated public servants, but there were always exceptions. And as a black woman, Elaine had learned long ago that traffic stops came with an extra layer of caution. She pulled over carefully, positioning her car well out of traffic's way. Her hands moved automatically. Turn off the radio, put the car in park, roll down the window halfway, hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The habits of survival were deeply ingrained. Through her side mirror, she watched the officer approach. Even in the dim evening light, something about his walk set off alarm bells. There was a swagger, a confidence that went beyond professional authority. "License and registration," he demanded without preamble, not even a cursory greeting. His flashlight beam swept across her face, momentarily blinding her. "Good evening, officer," Elaine replied calmly, keeping her tone neutral and polite. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" The officer, Reynolds, according to his nameplate, didn't answer immediately. His flashlight beam moved around the interior of her car, as if searching for something. Elaine remained still, resisting the urge to shield her eyes from the harsh light. "I'll ask the questions," Officer Reynolds finally said. "License and registration. Now." Elaine nodded. "I'm going to reach for my purse to get my license and then the glove compartment for my registration." She narrated her movements, another habit born from experience and stories she'd heard both in and out of her courtroom. As she reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, she noticed Officer Reynolds' hand shift to rest on his holster. The small movement sent a chill through her. "Here's my license," she said, keeping her voice steady as she handed over her driver's license. "I'm getting my registration now." As she leaned toward the glove compartment, she heard Officer Reynolds step away from her window. Through her mirrors, she watched as he circled toward the back of her car. Strange. Officers usually stayed by the driver's window until they had all the requested documents. The sound came suddenly, a sharp, violent crack that made Elaine jump in her seat. It was followed by the unmistakable tinkle of glass falling onto asphalt. For a moment, Elaine froze, her mind racing to process what had happened. Had something hit her car? Had the officer dropped something? Officer Reynolds returned to her window, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. In his hand was his heavy-duty flashlight. Elaine's eyes darted to her rearview mirror, but from her angle she couldn't see what had happened behind her. "Seems you've got a broken taillight there, ma'am," he said, the false concern in his voice barely masking his satisfaction. "That's a safety violation." The realization hit Elaine like a physical blow. He had broken her taillight, deliberately, with his flashlight. Her pulse quickened, and she felt heat rising to her face. Years of courtroom composure were the only thing keeping her expression neutral. As a judge, she'd heard testimony about this tactic before, officers manufacturing a reason for a citation or a search. But experiencing it firsthand was different. The violation, the powerlessness, the sheer injustice of it threatened to overwhelm her professional calm. "Officer Reynolds," she began, careful to keep her voice level. "Did you just break my taillight?" "Excuse me?" His tone hardened, and he shined the flashlight directly into her eyes again. "Are you accusing an officer of damaging your vehicle? That's a serious allegation." Elaine squinted against the light but didn't look away. "I heard glass breaking after you walked to the rear of my car. Your taillight was already broken. That's why I pulled you over." The lie came easily to him. "Now, have you been drinking tonight?" The sudden shift in questioning was another tactic she recognized, keeping her off balance, changing the subject, escalating the stop. Elaine knew this game all too well from the cases that came before her bench. "No, I have not been drinking," she replied. "I'm coming home from work." "And what kind of work would that be?" Officer Reynolds asked, a hint of condescension in his voice as his eyes took in her professional attire. Elaine hesitated. She never used her position to get special treatment, but in this moment, she wondered if revealing she was a judge would change the officer's approach. But something told her to hold that card close. If this officer was willing to break her taillight, who knew what else he might do? Better to document everything first. "I work at the county courthouse," she said, simply offering her registration. Officer Reynolds took the document, glancing at it with barely disguised disinterest. "Wait here," he ordered, returning to his patrol car. As soon as he was out of earshot, Elaine reached for her phone. Without looking down, she activated the voice recorder app, another habit from years of legal practice. Always document everything. She placed the phone on her lap, the screen dark but the recorder running. Through her mirrors, she could see Officer Reynolds in his cruiser, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face as he presumably ran her information. She used those moments to take deep, calming breaths. What was his angle? Was it simply a power trip, or was there something more? In her years on the bench, she'd seen the range of police misconduct cases, from the relatively minor to the truly horrific. Where would this incident fall? After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, Officer Reynolds returned. He had a citation book in hand, already writing. "Well, Ms. Jackson, I'm issuing you a citation for operating a vehicle with a broken taillight," he said, continuing to write. "It's a safety violation under State Vehicle Code Section 24252. Elaine noticed he'd dropped the ma'am he'd used. Earlier, another small power play. "I understand the vehicle code, officer," she said quietly. "Do you now?" He looked up, eyebrows raised. "Most people don't bother reading all that legal mumbo-jumbo. I find it's good to know the law," Elaine replied, careful not to reveal too much. Officer Reynolds snorted. "Right. Well, sign here. It's not an admission of guilt, just acknowledging you received the citation." As he handed her the citation, book and pen, his flashlight deliberately illuminated her hands. Elaine noticed him looking at her wedding ring and the modest diamond on her finger. "Husband let you drive his car tonight?" he asked with a smirk. The casual sexism layered on top of the already tense situation made Elaine's jaw clench. But she simply replied, "The car is registered in my name, as you saw." She signed the citation, her signature as measured and controlled as her voice, despite the anger and humiliation churning inside her. "Court date's on there if you want to contest it," Officer Reynolds said as he tore off her copy, sounding utterly confident she wouldn't. "Though between you and me, it's easier just to pay the fine. Judge Harrison tends to side with officer testimony." The irony of his statement almost made Elaine laugh. Judge Harrison was one of her colleagues, a fair-minded jurist who certainly didn't automatically side with anyone. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, accepting the citation. "Get that taillight fixed," Officer Reynolds added as he stepped back from her car. "Wouldn't want to have to pull you over again." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Elaine watched in her mirrors as he returned to his patrol car, her mind already working through what she would do next. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But the courthouse wasn't just her workplace, it was her arena. And Officer Reynolds had no idea who he'd just challenged. As she pulled carefully back onto the road, mindful of the now broken taillight, Elaine's headache was forgotten. In its place was a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Sometimes justice needed a helping hand, and Elaine Jackson was more than qualified for the job. Elaine's house was dark when she pulled into her driveway, the porch light the only welcome after the unsettling traffic stop. She sat in her car for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, the citation paper crumpled slightly in her fist. The familiar surroundings of her own property should have brought comfort, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't ease. She grabbed her phone, stopping the voice recording app that had captured the entire interaction with Officer Reynolds. Then she twisted in her seat, trying to see the damage to her taillight. From this angle, all she could make out was a jagged hole where red plastic should have been. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the concrete as she walked to the rear of her sedan. The damage was worse than she'd imagined. Not only was the red cover completely shattered, but the bulb inside was broken too, with what looked like deliberate impact marks around the housing. This wasn't an accident or a tap that went too far. The officer had put force behind his swing. Elaine pulled out her phone again and snapped several photos, making sure to capture the damage from multiple angles. The streetlight overhead provided just enough illumination to document the evidence. As she took the pictures, a neighbor across the street peered out from behind curtains. Elaine raised a hand in a small wave and the curtain dropped back into place. "Must look strange," she muttered to herself. A woman in a business suit taking photos of her broken taillight at 9 o'clock at night. Inside her house, Elaine dropped her purse and keys on the entryway table with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the quiet rooms. She kicked off her heels, leaving them where they fell, something she never did, and headed straight for her home office. Her desktop computer hummed to life as she transferred the voice recording and photos from her phone. Creating a new folder labeled Reynolds Incident, she organized everything chronologically, adding brief notes about what had happened while it was still fresh in her mind. The logical, methodical process helped calm the anger that had been simmering since the officer's flashlight had struck her taillight. When she finished, Elaine sat back in her chair staring at the screen. In her courtroom, she'd seen countless cases involving police encounters. She'd heard testimonies from both sides, weighed evidence, and made rulings based on law and fact. But now she was on the other side of the equation, the wronged party, seeking justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Kids are excited for Sunday dinner. Should we bring anything?" The normalcy of the message made Elaine smile despite everything. "Just yourselves," she texted back. "And maybe that chocolate cake the kids love." She didn't mention the incident. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed to think. Sleep was elusive that night. Elaine tossed and turned, replaying the encounter in her mind, thinking of things she should have said or done. By morning, exhaustion had given way to resolve. She rose early, made a stronger coffee than usual, and dressed with particular care. Today wasn't just another day on the bench. It was the first day of her response to Officer Reynolds' actions. The hardware store was her first stop. The middle-aged clerk raised his eyebrows when she explained she needed a replacement taillight. "Someone broke it last night," Elaine said, not elaborating. "Kids these days," the clerk sighed, leading her to the automotive section. No respect for property. Elaine just nodded, not bothering to correct his assumption. With the replacement part secured in her trunk, Elaine headed to her next destination, Hank's auto shop. The garage was already busy with the Saturday morning rush, but Hank himself came out when she pulled in. "Judge Jackson," he greeted her with a nod. They weren't friends exactly, but Hank had been her mechanic for years, and his daughter had once served as a summer intern at the courthouse. "What brings you in today?" Elaine led him to the back of her car. "Someone damaged my taillight last night. I bought the replacement part, but I'd like you to document the damage before fixing it." Hank crouched down, examining the broken light, with a mechanic's trained eye. "This wasn't an accident," he said, looking up at her. "Something hit this with force. See these impact marks?" "I know," Elaine replied quietly. "Can you write up an assessment? Something official I can keep for my records?" Hank's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't ask the questions clearly on his mind. Sure thing. Won't take but a few minutes to write up, then we'll get this fixed for you. While waiting, Elaine sat in the customer lounge, scrolling through her phone. A local news app caught her eye, specifically an article about community complaints regarding aggressive policing in certain neighborhoods. She bookmarked it for later research. Judge Jackson? Hank appeared with a clipboard. Here's the damage assessment. I've noted that the damage appears consistent with deliberate impact from a hard cylindrical object, not something that would happen in a minor collision or from road debris. Thank you, Hank, Elaine said, taking the clipboard and signing where indicated. I appreciate your thoroughness. Mind if I ask what happened? Hank's voice was low, his expression concerned. This the kind of damage you see when someone's taken a bat to a car, not normal wear and tear. Elaine considered her answer carefully. I'm looking into it, she said finally. It's better if I don't say more right now. Hank nodded slowly. Understood. We'll have your car ready in about an hour. With time to kill, Elaine walked to a cafe across the street. Over a cup of tea, she pulled out her phone and opened her contacts list. Her finger hovered over a name, District Attorney Grace Chen. They'd worked together for years, sometimes allies, sometimes adversaries in the courtroom, but always with mutual respect. After a moment's hesitation, she typed out a text. Grace, do you have time for coffee next week? There's something I'd like to discuss, not urgent but important. The response came quickly. Tuesday, 1 p.m. at Riverside Cafe. Perfect, Elaine replied. See you then. By the time she collected her car, with its newly installed taillight, Elaine had made 3 more appointments for the coming week. One with the police department's internal affairs division, one with a trusted private investigator who often worked with her court, and one with the county's traffic camera office. That evening, as Elaine prepared vegetables for Sunday's family dinner, her sister called. You sound tired, Lisa said after a few minutes of conversation. Tough week in court? Elaine paused, knife hovering over a half-chopped carrot. Something happened last night, she said finally. A police officer pulled me over and broke my taillight on purpose, then cited me for having a broken taillight. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Are you serious? Lisa's voice was tight with anger. Tell me you got his badge number. Officer Reynolds, Elaine confirmed. And yes, I have a lot more than his badge number. I recorded most of the interaction. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine, Elaine assured her. Angry, but fine. So, what are you going to do? Go to his supervisor? The media? Elaine resumed chopping, the rhythmic sound of knife against cutting board punctuating her words. I'm going to do what I do best, Lisa. Build a case, gather evidence, and make sure there are consequences. But will there be? Lisa's skepticism was clear. You know how these things usually go. Not this time, Elaine said firmly. He picked the wrong person to target. After they hung up, Elaine's thoughts drifted to all the people who'd stood before her bench over the years, claiming police misconduct or fabricated charges. How many of them had been telling the truth? How many cases had she judged differently because she hadn't personally experienced what they described? The questions troubled her as she finished preparing the food for tomorrow. She wasn't naive. She knew that her position as a judge gave her resources and credibility that most people lacked. If Officer Reynolds had broken the taillight of someone without her connections and knowledge of the system, would anything be done about it? Probably not. But she could do something about it now. Sunday dinner with her sister's family provided a welcome distraction. Her niece and nephew filled the house with laughter and stories from school, and for a few hours, Elaine set aside thoughts of broken taillights and abuses of power. But as she hugged them goodbye that evening, her resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about one broken taillight or one citation. This was about a system that allowed such abuses to happen, that emboldened officers like Reynolds to target people based on their appearance, confident there would be no repercussions. Monday. Morning arrived with a clarity of purpose. Judge Elaine Jackson walked into the courthouse with her head held high, nodding to the security guards and clerks as she made her way to her chambers. Today, she had a full docket of cases to hear. But in the background, her other case, the one she never expected to be personally involved in, was just beginning to take shape. And Officer Reynolds had no idea what was coming. Tuesday's lunch meeting with District Attorney Grace Chen was set for 1 o'clock, but Elaine arrived at Riverside Cafe 20 minutes early. She chose a corner table with a view of both the door and the river beyond the cafe's glass wall. The familiar comfort of the place, with its warm wood tables and the scent of fresh coffee, provided a stark contrast to the conversation she was about to have. Elaine had known Grace for nearly a decade. They'd started their careers around the same time, and though their professional roles often put them on opposite sides of the courtroom, a mutual respect had grown into friendship over the years. Grace arrived precisely on time, dressed in her usual impeccable suit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her sharp eyes caught sight of Elaine immediately, and her usual smile of greeting faltered slightly as she noticed Elaine's serious expression. "This doesn't look like a casual catch-up lunch," Grace said as she sat down, declining a menu with a shake of her head. The server poured water for them both and retreated. "It's not," Elaine confirmed, sliding a folder across the table. "I need your perspective on something." Grace opened the folder and scanned its contents, the photos of the broken taillight, Hank's repair assessment, the citation, and a transcript Elaine had prepared of the voice recording. "Is this what I think it is?" Grace asked, her voice lowered despite the relative privacy of their table. Elaine nodded. "Officer Thomas Reynolds. Friday night, just after 9. Pulled me over for no reason, broke my taillight with his flashlight, then cited me for having a broken taillight." Grace's expression hardened as she continued reading. "He didn't know who you were?" "I didn't tell him I'm a judge, if that's what you're asking. I just said I work at the courthouse." "Smart," Grace murmured, still reading. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with a cold anger that Elaine recognized from particularly difficult prosecutions. "What are you planning to do?" "That's partly why I wanted to meet," Elaine said. "I've got an appointment with Internal Affairs tomorrow. I've also requested the dash cam footage from Officer Reynolds' cruiser and any body cam footage that might exist. And if they claim technical difficulties? Missing footage?" Elaine had anticipated this. "I've also put in a request for traffic camera footage from the intersection where he pulled me over, and I have the voice recording, which clearly captures the sound of glass breaking after he walked to the back of my car." The server returned, and both women ordered a simple lunch neither of them would really taste, their minds too occupied with the matter at hand. "There's something else," Elaine continued when they were alone again. "I've been doing some research. Officer Reynolds has an unusual number of citations issued for broken taillights in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, far higher than the departmental average." Grace's eyebrows rose. "How did you get that data? Remember Miguel in the clerk's office? He pulled the citation records for me. Just raw numbers, nothing confidential. Public information, technically." "Technically," Grace echoed with a small smile. "You've been busy." "I've also spoken with a private investigator," Elaine admitted. "David Wells. He's discreet and thorough." "I know David." Grace nodded approvingly. "He's testified in several of my cases. He's going to look into Reynolds' history, see if there have been other complaints." Grace was quiet for a moment, tapping her fingernail against her water glass. "Elaine, can I ask you something? Why aren't you recusing yourself from this entirely? You could file a complaint as a private citizen, let IA handle it, and stay completely out of the investigation." It was a fair question, and one Elaine had asked herself repeatedly over the past few days. "2 reasons," she said finally. "First, if this happened to me, a judge with resources and knowledge of the system, it's definitely happening to others without my advantages. And second," she paused, searching for the right words, "this isn't just about one broken taillight. This is about abuse of power. And if I don't use the power I have to address it, what does that say about me?" Grace nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but tread carefully. You know how the thin blue line works. They protect their own. Which is exactly the problem, Elaine replied. But I'm not going in blind or alone. I've got evidence and I've got you. Me? Grace looked surprised. I'm not asking you to step outside your role, Elaine clarified. But I may need your advice. And if this goes where I think it might, the DA's office should be prepared. Their food arrived and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Grace's daughter starting college, Elaine's upcoming vacation plans. But the folder remained on the table between them, a tangible reminder of the issue that had brought them together. As they were finishing their meals, Grace suddenly asked, "Have you considered that this could get messy? Not just professionally, but personally. Officers like Reynolds don't take kindly to being investigated." The thought had crossed Elaine's mind. "I've considered it," she said, "but I can't let fear of retaliation stop me from doing what's right." "Just be careful," Grace urged, "and maybe install some security cameras at your house, if you haven't already." They parted with a promise to touch base after Elaine's meeting with Internal Affairs. Walking back to the courthouse, Elaine couldn't shake Grace's warning. The possibility of retaliation was real, but so was her determination to see this through. The next morning, Elaine sat in a sterile conference room in the police department's administrative building. Across from her were Lieutenant Anthony Rivera of Internal Affairs and Sergeant Kimberly Patel, who took notes on a department laptop. "Judge Jackson," Lieutenant Rivera began, his tone professionally neutral. "We appreciate you bringing this matter to our attention. I've reviewed the materials you provided ahead of this meeting." Elaine nodded, noting that while he acknowledged receiving her evidence, he gave no indication of what he thought about it. "Can you walk us through the events of Friday night?" Sergeant Patel asked. For the next 20 minutes, Elaine recounted the traffic stop in detail. Officer Reynolds' aggressive approach, the sound of breaking glass, his smug demeanor when issuing the citation. She kept her tone measured and factual, as if she were listening to testimony in her own courtroom rather than providing it. "And you're certain Officer Reynolds deliberately broke your taillight?" Lieutenant Rivera asked, his expression carefully blank. "Yes," Elaine said firmly. "I heard the glass break after he walked to the back of my vehicle. The damage was consistent with a forceful impact as documented by the mechanic's assessment I provided. And most tellingly, Officer Reynolds cited me for the broken taillight that he himself had just created." "Have you received the dash cam or body cam footage you requested?" Sergeant Patel asked. "Not yet," Elaine replied. "I was told it would take 5 to 7 business days to process that request." Lieutenant Rivera made a note on his pad. "I'll expedite that for you." "There's something else," Elaine added. "I've analyzed the citation data for Officer Reynolds over the past year. He issues broken taillight citations at a rate 3 times, higher than the departmental average and almost exclusively in minority neighborhoods." Both officers looked up sharply at this. "That's concerning information," Lieutenant Rivera said carefully. "May I ask how you obtained this data?" "Public records," Elaine said simply, sliding a printout across the table. "Citations are a matter of public record." Sergeant Patel examined the document. "This pattern, if accurate, certainly warrants further investigation." "What outcome are you hoping for, Judge Jackson?" Lieutenant Rivera asked. It was a loaded question, and Elaine knew it. Too aggressive, and she'd face resistance. Too lenient, and nothing would change. "I want a fair and thorough investigation," she said. "If the evidence supports my account, I expect appropriate disciplinary action against Officer Reynolds. But more importantly, I want systemic changes that prevent this kind of misconduct from happening to anyone else." The meeting concluded with assurances that they would investigate thoroughly and keep her informed of their findings. As Elaine left the building, she wasn't entirely convinced. Internal affairs investigations often protected officers more than they held them accountable. Outside, the bright midday sun made her squint as she checked her phone. A text from David Wells, the private investigator, confirmed their meeting for that afternoon. There was also a message from her sister. "How did it go? Call me later." Elaine took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling the weight of the morning's meeting begin to lift. This was just one step in a longer journey, but she'd made her case clearly and firmly. Whether Internal Affairs would act on it remained to be seen. As she walked to her car, Elaine noticed a patrol car slowly cruising past the parking lot. The officer inside wasn't Reynolds, but the deliberate pace and prolonged stare in her direction sent a clear message. They knew what she was doing. Instead of intimidating her, the display only strengthened her resolve. If they were watching her, she would make absolutely certain she gave them something worth seeing. A by-the-book pursuit of justice that even the most entrenched system couldn't ignore. 2 weeks passed, with a frustrating lack of progress. Elaine checked her email and phone messages multiple times a day, waiting for updates from Internal Affairs, but received only vague assurances that the investigation was ongoing. The traffic camera footage request had been denied. The camera, at that intersection, had been undergoing maintenance that night. Convenient timing, Elaine thought bitterly. The dashcam footage, when it finally arrived, showed her car being pulled over but conveniently cut out during the critical minutes when Officer Reynolds had circled to the back of her vehicle. The body cam footage was even more suspicious. Officer Reynolds had apparently failed to activate it until after returning to her window with the citation book in hand. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Elaine sat in her chambers during a lunch recess, reviewing notes from David Wells. The private investigator had been more productive than the official channels, uncovering 3 previous complaints against Officer Reynolds for similar incidents, all dismissed due to insufficient evidence. A knock at her door interrupted her reading. "Come in," she called, quickly sliding the folder into her desk drawer. Her clerk, Tina, poked her head in. "Judge, there's a woman here asking to speak with you. She says it's about Officer Reynolds. I told her you were in recess, but she's pretty insistent." Elaine's interest was immediately piqued. "Did she give a name?" "Lucia Ortiz. Says she saw your car at Hank's Auto Shop a couple weeks ago and overheard you talking about the taillight." "Send her in," Elaine decided after a moment's consideration. Lucia Ortiz was a small woman in her early 30s, dressed in hospital scrubs with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She entered Elaine's chambers with visible nervousness, clutching her purse tightly. "Ms. Ortiz, please sit down." Elaine gestured to the chair across from her desk. "My clerk says you wanted to speak with me about Officer Reynolds?" Lucia nodded, perching on the edge of the chair. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she began, her voice soft but determined. "But when I saw you at the auto shop, talking about your taillight, I knew it wasn't just me." "He did the same thing to you?" Elaine asked, leaning forward. 3 months ago, Lucia confirmed. "I was driving home from my night shift at the hospital. He pulled me over, went to the back of my car, and I heard a crash. Then he came back and gave me a ticket for a broken taillight." She shook her head, the memory clearly still raw. "I told my husband what happened, but he said it would be our word against the cops, and we couldn't afford to fight it, so I just paid the fine." Elaine felt a mixture of vindication and anger. "Did you report it to anyone?" "No," Lucia admitted. "I was scared. We're trying to get our green cards, and my husband said we shouldn't cause trouble." "I understand," Elaine said gently. "But would you be willing to make a statement now? It could help stop him from doing this to others." Lucia hesitated, then nodded. "That's why I'm here. After I saw you, I asked around. There are others, Judge Jackson. At least 5 people I know from my neighborhood and the hospital have had the same experience with him." This was exactly what Elaine needed, corroborating witnesses. "Ms. Ortiz, would you be willing to help me get in touch with these other people?" "They're scared too," Lucia warned. "But I'll try." By the end of their conversation, Lucia had agreed to provide a sworn statement and to reach out to the others who'd had similar experiences with Officer Reynolds. As she left, Elaine felt the first real sense of momentum since the investigation began. She immediately called Grace Chen to update her on this development. "This could be the break we needed," Grace agreed when Elaine finished explaining. "If we can get multiple victims to come forward with the same story, it's much harder to dismiss." "There's something else," Elaine added. "Wells found 3 previous complaints that were buried. If we combine those with Lucia's statement and anyone else she can bring forward, it establishes a pattern of behavior. Grace finished the thought. Much stronger case. But I'm worried about these people, Grace. Lucia's concerned about her immigration status. Others might have similar vulnerabilities. Reynolds picked his targets carefully. Let me look into some protections we can offer, Grace promised. In the meantime, keep gathering statements. And Elaine, be careful. If Reynolds gets wind of this. I know, Elaine said. I've installed security cameras at my house, like you suggested. Over the next week, Elaine met with 4 more people who shared nearly identical stories about Officer Reynolds, a college student who'd been pulled over near campus, an elderly man who'd been driving home from his late shift as a janitor, a single mother who'd been taking her sick child to a late-night urgent care. All of them had the same experience. Reynolds had pulled them over, broken their taillight, and issued a citation. All of them were people of color. All of them had been alone. All of them had felt powerless to fight back. With David Wells's help, Elaine compiled their statements along with the documentation of the previous complaints and her own evidence. The case against Officer Reynolds was becoming undeniable, but the response from Internal Affairs remained frustratingly slow and non-committal. They're stonewalling, Elaine told her sister over dinner one night. They're hoping it will just go away. So don't let it, Lisa replied simply. You've got options they don't expect you to use. Elaine raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? You're thinking like a judge, following proper channels. Maybe it's time to think like someone who doesn't have faith in the system. It was a perspective shift Elaine needed. The next morning, she made 2 calls. The first was to an old law school friend who now worked as a civil rights attorney. The second was to a journalist she'd come to respect for his fair coverage of court cases. By the end of the day, 2 things had happened. A civil rights lawsuit had been filed against Officer Reynolds in the police department, and the local newspaper had run a front-page story about the pattern of broken taillights and targeted harassment. The response was immediate. Elaine's phone rang as she was driving home. It was Lieutenant Rivera from Internal Affairs. Judge Jackson, he began, his tone noticeably less casual than in their previous conversations. I've just been informed about the lawsuit and the newspaper article. Yes, Elaine replied simply. What about your investigation, Lieutenant? It's been over 3 weeks. We've encountered some delays, he said carefully. But in light of these new developments, the department would like to schedule a formal hearing for Officer Reynolds next week. We'd like you to testify. I'll be there, Elaine promised, along with 5 other witnesses who've experienced the same treatment from Officer Reynolds. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. 5 others? Lieutenant Rivera finally managed. So far, Elaine confirmed. We expect more to come forward now that the story is public. I see. His voice had turned cold. You should know, Judge Jackson, that Officer Reynolds is claiming these allegations are politically motivated. He says you're targeting him because he issued you a citation. Elaine laughed without humor. That's a convenient defense. Fortunately, I have the broken glass from my taillight, photographic evidence, a voice recording, and 5 other victims with identical stories. Does Officer Reynolds have an explanation for why his body camera wasn't activated during our encounter? Or why his dash cam footage has a convenient gap? These will all be matters addressed at the hearing, Lieutenant Rivera said stiffly. After hanging up, Elaine allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The case was moving forward at last. The newspaper article had generated dozens of calls and emails from people expressing support or sharing their own stories about police misconduct. The civil rights attorney reported that 3 more people had come forward with similar experiences involving Officer Reynolds. The tide was turning. But as Elaine pulled into her driveway that evening, she noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. It wasn't Reynolds. He'd been placed on administrative leave pending the hearing, but the message was clear. She was being watched. Instead of feeling intimidated, Elaine walked calmly to her front door, making sure the security cameras captured her movements. Inside, she called Grace to update her on the day's developments. The hearing set for next Tuesday, she concluded. They couldn't ignore it once the story went public. Smart move, Grace said approvingly. Sometimes the system needs a push from outside to work properly. Will you be ready? Elaine looked at the thick folder of evidence on her coffee table, thinking of Lucia and the others who'd trusted her with their stories. More than ready, she assured her friend. For the first time in my career, I'm looking forward to being on the witness stand instead of behind the bench. As she hung up, Elaine noticed the police cruiser was still there, its occupant watching her house. Let them watch, she thought. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. The morning of the hearing arrived. With a strange mix of tension and calm, Elaine had prepared as thoroughly as she would for a major trial, reviewing evidence, rehearsing her testimony, and meeting with the other witnesses to ensure they felt supported. Now, as she stood in her kitchen sipping her second cup of coffee, she felt an odd sense of peace. Whatever happened today, the truth would finally be heard. Her doorbell rang precisely at 8, right on schedule. David Wells, the private investigator, stood on her porch with Lucia Ortiz and 2 other witnesses. They would all travel to the police department together, safety in numbers and a show of solidarity. Everyone ready? Elaine asked as they gathered. In her living room. Lucia nodded, though her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse. A little nervous, she admitted. I've never done anything like this. Just tell the truth, Elaine assured her. That's all any of us needs to do today. The police department's hearing room was designed to be intimidating. Wood-paneled walls, harsh overhead lighting, and a raised dais where the 3-person review board would sit. It resembled a courtroom but lacked the balance of a true judicial setting. Here, the police department controlled the environment, the rules, and traditionally, the outcome. But today felt different. The room was unusually full. In addition to the witnesses Elaine had gathered, several community members and activists had shown up after reading the newspaper story. A reporter sat in the back corner with a notepad, despite the department's usual resistance to media presence. And most surprisingly, District Attorney Grace Chen had arrived, taking a seat directly behind where Elaine and her group would sit. Moral support, Grace murmured as Elaine raised a questioning eyebrow. And a reminder to the board that the DA's office is watching. Officer Reynolds entered from a side door, accompanied by his union representative and a department lawyer. He wore his full uniform, medals and badges gleaming under the lights. A clear attempt to remind everyone of his authority. His eyes swept the room, narrowing when they landed on Elaine and the group with her. If he was surprised by the turnout, he hid it well, but the tight set of his jaw betrayed his tension. Lieutenant Rivera and 2 other high-ranking officers filed in and took their places at the dais. The hearing began with formal introductions and an explanation of the process. It would not be a trial, Lieutenant Rivera emphasized, but an investigative hearing to determine if disciplinary action was warranted. Elaine was called first. She walked to the witness chair with the same confidence she brought to her own courtroom, back straight, head high. After being sworn in, she recounted the events of that night clearly and methodically, from the moment Reynolds had pulled her over to the discovery of her broken taillight. And you believe Officer Reynolds deliberately broke your taillight? Asked Captain Wilson, one of the board members. I don't just believe it, Elaine replied firmly. I heard it happen. I documented the damage, and I later discovered this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern of similar actions against other drivers. The department lawyer leaned forward. Judge Jackson, isn't it possible you're pursuing this complaint because you were upset about receiving a citation? Elaine met his gaze steadily. I've been a judge for 15 years. I've dismissed and upheld thousands of citations based on evidence, not emotion. If Officer Reynolds had legitimately cited me for an actual violation, we wouldn't be here today. But he manufactured a violation, and that crosses a line that cannot be tolerated in law enforcement. Her testimony continued for nearly an hour, as she presented the evidence she'd gathered. The voice recording that captured the sound of breaking glass, the photos of the damage, Hank's professional assessment of the taillight, and the statistics, showing Reynolds' disproportionate rate of taillight citations in minority neighborhoods. When she finished, Officer Reynolds was visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and whispering urgently to his representatives. But the real impact came from the parade of witnesses that followed. Lucia spoke next, her initial nervousness giving way to quiet dignity as she described her own experience. Then came the others, the college student, the elderly janitor, the single mother. One after another they told nearly identical stories, Reynolds pulling them over, the sound of breaking glass, the citation for a violation he had created himself. By the time the last witness finished, the atmosphere in the hearing room had changed dramatically. What had begun as a standard internal review, expected to quietly fade away, had transformed into something more significant. The evidence was too consistent, the pattern too clear to dismiss. Officer Reynolds took the stand last, his earlier confidence noticeably diminished. He denied the allegations, claiming that all the witnesses were mistaken or lying. The taillights had already been broken, he insisted. He was just doing his job enforcing vehicle safety regulations. And is it just coincidence, Lieutenant Rivera asked, sounding genuinely troubled, that all these broken taillight citations occurred in predominantly minority neighborhoods? I patrol those areas, Reynolds replied defensively. I don't choose where broken taillights happen. And the gap in your body camera footage during Judge Jackson's traffic stop? Equipment malfunction, Reynolds said. It happens every time you approach a vehicle with a soon-to-be broken taillight, apparently, Captain Wilson observed dryly. The hearing concluded with closing statements from both sides. The board would deliberate and issue their findings within 48 hours, Lieutenant Rivera announced. As the room began to clear, Elaine gathered with her witnesses in the hallway. What happens now? Lucia asked, the uncertainty evident in her voice. We wait, Elaine said. But regardless of their decision, what you all did today matters. You spoke up, you told your stories, and people heard you. Grace joined them, her expression cautiously optimistic. That went better than expected, she said quietly to Elaine. They can't possibly let him off without some consequences. I hope you're right, Elaine replied. But this was never just about one officer, it's about the system that protected him for so long. As they walked toward the exit, Officer Reynolds and his representatives emerged from the hearing room. For a moment, the two groups faced each other in the hallway. Reynolds' eyes locked with Elaine's, his expression a mix of anger and something else. Perhaps the first glimmer of understanding that his actions had finally caught up with him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The evidence had spoken for itself. 2 days later, Elaine was in her chambers reviewing case files when her phone rang. It was Lieutenant Rivera. Judge Jackson, he began formally. I'm calling to inform you that the review board has completed its deliberations regarding Officer Reynolds. Elaine held her breath, preparing herself for disappointment. The board has unanimously recommended termination of Officer Reynolds' employment, effective immediately. Additionally, all citations he issued for broken taillights over the past 3 years will be reviewed and likely dismissed. Relief washed over her. Thank you for letting me know, Lieutenant. There's more, he continued, his tone softening slightly. The chief has ordered a department-wide review of traffic stop procedures and citation patterns, and he hesitated. I want to personally thank you for bringing this to our attention. It's not easy to admit, but we failed here. We should have caught this pattern long before you did. After hanging up, Elaine sat quietly for several minutes, processing the news. It was a victory, yes, but a bittersweet one. How many others had faced similar injustices without the resources or position to fight back? How many officers like Reynolds were still out there, abusing their power? One case wouldn't change everything, but it was a start. Over the next several months, Elaine watched as the ripple effects of the Reynolds case spread through the community. The civil rights lawsuit was settled, with the department agreeing to implement new oversight measures and bias training. Lucia and the other witnesses formed a community watchdog group to document and report police misconduct, and in a move that surprised everyone, the mayor appointed Elaine to a new police oversight commission, giving her a formal role in shaping reform. 6 months after that fateful traffic stop, Elaine stood at a podium in the community center addressing a packed room of residents, activists, and police officers. "What happened to me that night was wrong," she began. "But what happened to so many others before me was worse because they didn't have a judge's resources or connections. They weren't heard. Today, that changes. Today, we begin a new chapter in how our community and our police work together, with transparency, accountability, and respect." As she looked out at the audience, at Lucia sitting proudly in the front row, at the young officers listening attentively, at Grace Chen nodding in approval, Elaine felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced in her years. On the bench, one broken taillight had led to something no one could have predicted, the first real cracks in a system that had been broken for far too long. And through those cracks, light was finally beginning to shine through.